Good evening, everybody. Tonight I'd like to talk about immigration policy. Frankly, the biggest mess we currently face in this country. To have a sensible immigration policy in the UK, we need to abolish the distinction between economic migrants on the one hand and asylum seekers stroke refugees on the other. It's a distinction which dates from the immediate aftermath of World War II, and it's enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. I'll come back to that in a minute, but it's obsolete. The fact is that most economic migrants are looking for more money, bigger wage packets, often to send home in remittances to their families, and they have the same right to look after their families in that way as Westerners do. But the vast majority of economic migrants are not motivated solely by the size of their wage packet. They're also attracted to Western countries by other factors: democracy, freedom of expression, opportunities, particularly for entrepreneurial activity without the corruption they hope that's prevalent in their own countries. They're often disappointed, but that's another issue. And very often Western culture and educational opportunities appeal as well. So they're not solely motivated by money, and the term economic migrant is somewhat misleading. On the other hand, you have the refugees and asylum seekers, and the assumption in the ECHR and in most of the current debate is that these are short-term migrants who will return home sometime soon. In the modern world, sadly, that is a myth. Most of the refugees from Syria are not going home anytime soon because there is no sign of the war ending in Syria. Similarly, Afghan refugees, they're not going home anytime soon. The Taliban is back in power. The West spent 14 years and God knows how much money and how many lives trying to change that, and lost. Those who don't like the Taliban for whatever reason are not going home anytime soon because the Taliban isn't leaving anytime soon. Like it or lump it, that is just the reality. Similarly, unfortunately, Ukraine. The refugees from Ukraine, some of whom I teach, are not going home anytime soon. The truth of the matter is that Putin is close to winning the war in Ukraine. He's captured most of the territory he wants. He has locked most of Western Europe into the worst economic crisis since 1929, and he knows full well that the freedoms in the West mean that Western people are more likely to rise up in protest against the economic consequences of the war than his own people who are held back by repression. Putin calculated that from the beginning, and the truth is that he's right. He has basically won in Ukraine, and the refugees are not going home anytime soon. In all of these cases, Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, and so on, even if they wanted to return home, there's not a lot left to return to. Most of these countries have been so badly damaged that it will be decades before there is anything worth returning to. So these people are with us in the long term. And it is not sustainable for Britain to support these people on welfare indefinitely. They have to be integrated into the economy, start contributing, start making a living. And the sooner that happens, the better. But the present distinction between economic migrants and asylum seekers and refugees does not allow them to work. Nonsense. This needs to change. So we need to get rid of that fundamental distinction between economic migrants and asylum seekers stroke refugees. Abolish it. So how do we decide who is eligible to come to the UK? My suggestion is that we use a completely new method based on the potential, I stress potential, of an applicant to contribute to UK society. And this can be assessed by psychometric testing. The important point here is potential. The Tory government have in the past experimented with various visa schemes that attract people based on skills and qualifications the UK needs. But all those systems are fundamentally flawed because they assume that everyone has access to the highest quality education and the kind of qualifications that Britain says it needs. They don't. This is a myth. 99% of the world's population does not have access to Harvard, however bright they are. So attracting the so-called brightest and best is a nonsense. It's also a myth that what Britain actually needs are experts in AI and algorithms. Most of that is bullshit. And even what isn't is froth on the top of the economy. What Britain really needs are people like bus drivers, care home workers, teachers, nurses, the people who actually keep society functioning, people that we need to value a heck of a lot more than we do now. And Britain should be looking for migrants who can contribute to UK society in any of those roles. Someone who can contribute as a care home worker is just as important as someone who can program a robot. And we need to get away from this idea that you assess people's qualification for immigration based on existing qualifications. You don't. What you're looking at is potential. And the way this can be done is by psychometric testing. You can have a battery of tests which assess issues like motivation, attitude, work ethic, morality, respect for the law, and so on. And anyone who qualifies under that kind of psychometric test becomes eligible. The great advantage of this system is that these tests can be administered in the migrants' home countries. There is no need for them to live for months in camps in Calais and risk their lives in inflatable dinghies crossing the channel. Psychometric testing of potential can be delivered in people's home countries. The simplest way of doing it would be to use the British Council's existing network of IELTS English language testing centres. Do that, and you can get a fairly accurate idea of those who are likely to contribute to British society in the future. They may not have PhDs right now, but that doesn't mean they're stupid, and it doesn't mean that they can't benefit from education and learn additional skills when they get here. What matters is that they have the motivation to do so. And that's how you operate a sensible immigration policy. But there are two important caveats to that. Firstly, a small minority of migrants abuse the system and commit serious crime. There needs to be a check done as quickly as possible, but there needs to be a check to prevent people with serious criminal records or terrorist convictions from entering the UK. And once people are in the UK, there needs to be an automatic system where anyone who commits serious crime, I don't mean a parking ticket, I mean, things that everyone accepts are serious crimes: rape, murder, robbery, and so on. These people are automatically deported at the end of their sentence with no appeal, and it makes no difference which country they came from. If they don't want to be deported back there, they shouldn't have committed the crime in the first place. So you have a very robust system of removing those who abuse the UK's hospitality. The second caveat obviously is provision of public services in the UK. Migrants do take up hospital beds. Their children do take up school places. They do put stress on social housing. All these things are reality. Those issues are not going away. But, and this is crucial, if you have a system whereby anyone who comes to the UK is not only allowed to work, is expected to work in key occupations that Britain needs. They are paying tax, they are paying national insurance, and those contributions can and should and must be used to provide the public services that they also use. It works both ways. At the moment, the systems are nonsense because people, asylum seekers and refugees, are using the public services, but they're contributing nothing in terms of tax towards the cost of those because they are not allowed to. That is idiotic and needs to change. And as long as you have a system where additional public services are basically self-financing, most of the social pressures will go away. So in a nutshell, this is how you have a sensible, enforceable, fair, non-racist immigration policy. The elephant in the room is that to achieve this, Britain has to not only leave the EU, which we have done, but also leave the European Convention on Human Rights. It might surprise you that a left-wing radical like me actually believes that we need to leave the ECHR, but I do. Because as long as we remain in the ECHR, it is impossible to abolish the distinction between economic migrants on the one hand and refugees, asylum seekers on the other in UK law. Until UK law is changed in that way, it is impossible to require refugees and asylum seekers to work, and it is impossible to introduce the kind of assessment testing in the home countries that we need to do to cut out the people smugglers. So we have to leave the ECHR. I say that with a heavy heart and with some trepidation, because, to be honest, leaving the ECHR under a Tory government of the type we have now is fraught with danger. Goodness knows what other essential freedoms and democratic rights they would use it to remove. But once we have a proper democratic radical government, then we have to leave the ECHR in order for that government to be able to implement a common sense, fair, non-racist immigration policy. And that is the way we move forward. Will it happen? Only if we make it happen. The present debate in the media is frankly 90% nonsense. People have to understand the basic issues and they have to start asking the right questions. You need to ask your MP and ministers, is there a valid distinction between economic migrants and refugees, asylum seekers? If not, what are you going to do about it? You need to be asking ministers, how can we have a non-racist immigration policy which does not presuppose access to higher education in order to qualify? You need to be asking ministers, how can we ensure provision of public services for an increasing population of migrants who will be staying long term. You have to ask your MP and ministers, does it make sense to keep asylum seekers living on benefits for many years, often in extreme poverty, paying them benefits and refusing them permission to work when Britain is begging for jobs? There are job vacancies everywhere. Britain is begging for care home workers, bus drivers, people to do many other essential services. Does it make sense to prevent asylum seekers and refugees from taking these jobs? No, it doesn't. But you need to ram that fact down the throat of your local MP until something changes. Thank you very much. Good night.